Hey everybody, Tom Woods, January 18th, 2012. Rick Santorum on the campaign trail recently made a few comments about money, inflation, and the Federal Reserve that I thought I would respond to, not so much because people think of Rick Santorum as being a particularly significant economic thinker, but just because I think it affords us an opportunity to address a lot of common misconceptions, and we can do it in just a few minutes. First, Santorum seems to think that the Constitution gives the U.S. Congress a kind of plenary authority over money. And to the contrary, the Constitution actually gives Congress very narrow powers over money, but this is a topic that I've addressed in a separate video. So if you're interested in that, what the Constitution says about money, what Congress is empowered to do and not empowered to do, then I recommend checking out my page tomwoods.com/dollar, which has that video, plus some references. And I talk about the history of the dollar, and that at the time of the Constitution, the dollar had a real fixed meaning. People actually knew what it was. It was, in fact, a pre-existing silver coin. It was not just some arbitrary thing that Congress could declare at a whim. So you can learn all about that over at tomwoods.com/dollar. What I want to talk about right now are the more strictly economic claims that Santorum made, and I jotted some of them down. So after a gentleman asked him what he thought about the fact that under the Federal Reserve System, the dollar has lost 95% of its value, Santorum was unimpressed by this because he said that the dollar is always going to lose its value, whether there's a Federal Reserve or not, whether the dollar is backed by gold or not. This is what he said. The dollar would be losing its value one way or another based on inflation, whatever that means. Then he says, it's always losing its value. Even when we had a gold standard, the dollar lost its money. I think there he misspoke and meant to say the dollar lost its value. Well, we can easily check this. Did the dollar lose its value under the gold standard? I mean, this is something that I would hope a guy running for president would know about. And in fact, of course, to the contrary, it gained value. If you bought an item for $100 in the year 1820, you could get that same item in 1913 for only $63. So imagine that, a system where your money actually holds its value and increases its value over time. And this is true of all systems all over the world that had a precious metal basis. Now let's go on. He says, you always want to have some inflation. You don't want deflation. Without a little bit of inflation, the economy stagnates. Well, one of the insights that the Austrian School of Economics has that's not shared by other modern schools, some of the classical economists shared it, is that the supply of money, strictly speaking, does not matter. Any supply of money is sufficient to facilitate all the exchanges that people want to engage in the economy. And it is a fallacy to say that as the economy grows or the population grows, the money supply needs to grow along with it. And in the resource page that I'll refer you to at the end of this video, there will be explanations of these points and why these things are in fact fallacies. But even if you don't want to go into the theoretical rationale, you can just look at empirical cases. You can look at actual history. Look at England, 1700 to 1930. In those centuries, England was under the classical gold standard. It had totally stable prices. And yet, did it stagnate? Didn't have a little bit of inflation, as Santorum says is necessary for prosperity. So did they in fact stagnate without inflation? To the contrary, economic growth was stronger, more robust, and faster in those years in England than it has been in any country in the history of the world. The only country and time that might have given England a run for its money was the United States after 1800, which also operated under a gold standard. Now, it's true that people will say that in the 19th century we had booms and busts, and on my resource page I will explain what caused those booms and busts. It certainly wasn't the gold standard per se, it was the continual paper money experiments that derogated from the gold standard. But the point is that who are you going to believe, Rick Santorum or your own eyes? Fantastic prosperity brought about by the very system Santorum insists can lead to only stagnation. Now, with regard to deflation, the papers and proceedings of the American Economic Review published an article in 2004 by two economists in which they just went back and bothered to look at the data. Instead of just yipping and yapping about it, they looked into it. They looked into 17 countries' experiences over a 100-year period. And their conclusion was there is no empirical link whatsoever between deflation and depression. Very interesting. I referenced that study in my book Meltdown, by the way. It's very important. So, in conclusion here, let me point out that you do hear a lot about deflation and how terrible it is, and we've all got to fear it. But we always hear this from people of influence, people in power, people of wealth. They're terrified of deflation, and they are not terrified of inflation. That should immediately make you suspicious. What's going on here? What is it about deflation that has these people in particular so concerned? People who aren't generally known for their concern for the common man. Why are they so concerned about deflation and not concerned about inflation? That's another key question that will be answered in the sources I'm going to refer you to, because as always, this video is culminating in a resource page. That's right, for you guys, tomwoods.com/inflation. We're going to have some articles there, video, books for those of you who are particularly adventurous in your crusade for knowledge. All this stuff will be there for you to help you understand what causes inflation, what the consequences of inflation and deflation are, so that you can make sense of all this, and so that you can know for sure when you're hearing a shyster and or somebody who is in way over his head. Tomorrow I'm going to do a video on the Catholic vote and Rick Santorum. What is a Catholic voter to do when faced with Rick Santorum and Ron Paul? That's tomorrow. Thanks for listening.